There's a stretch of West 57th Street in Manhattan, running for about 3 blocks south of Central Park, where the most expensive residential real estate in the history of New York City stands in a row. The towers are 1,396 feet, 1,428 feet, and 1,550 feet tall. They were built between 2012 and 2022. They were sold for a combined sum that runs well into the billions of dollars. And they are all by design leaning gently back and forth in the wind. That is not a defect. That is what these buildings were engineered to do. Tall and slender residential towers have to move with the wind, not against it, because a rigid tower at these proportions would simply break. The engineers who designed each of these buildings knew that. They built around it. They wrote it into the structural calculations. They tested it in wind tunnels for months. And in 2 of the 3 towers on this block, the engineering response was the same. Install an enormous suspended counterweight, hundreds of tons of steel hanging near the top of the building, calibrated to swing opposite the wind and absorb the energy that would otherwise reach the residents. The technical name for that device is a tuned mass damper. The buildings that have one swing within livable comfort limits. 432 Park Avenue, the building that sold $3.1 billion in apartments and was for years the tallest residential tower in the Western Hemisphere, was completed in 2015 without one. This is document number 7. The Billionaires Row pencil tower file is open. The story I want to walk you through is not a story about 3 buildings that are failing in the same way. It is the opposite. It is a story about 3 buildings on the same block, designed with the same fundamental problem, where 2 of them solved it with the same engineering choice, and 1 of them did not. And the one that did not is the one with the residents in court, the resale market in collapse, and the lawsuit alleging deliberate fraud. The decision that separates them is not invisible. It is the most expensive piece of mechanical equipment a tall residential tower can install. The question this file asks is, why the most expensive residential tower in the Western Hemisphere went up without it? To understand any of this, you have to understand what tall, slender buildings do in the wind. When fast-moving air strikes a tower, it does not simply flow around the corners and continue on its way. At sufficient speed, the airflow detaches from the building's surface and forms alternating columns of rotating low pressure on either side of the structure. These columns peel away from alternate corners in a repeating cycle. Engineers call this von Karman vortex shedding. In plain terms, the wind grabs the building on one side, lets go, grabs it on the other side, lets go, and cycles at a frequency determined by wind speed and building geometry. If that frequency happens to align with the natural oscillation frequency of the building itself, the structure begins to sway in resonance with the wind, each cycle reinforcing the next. In a stout tower with a height to width ratio of, say, 5 or 7 to 1, the building's own mass absorbs those forces passively. The wind grabs and lets go, and the building barely registers it. But these are not stout towers. 432 Park Avenue rises 1,396 feet on a footprint that is only 93 feet square. That gives it a slenderness ratio of approximately 15 to 1, 3 times what most residential towers are built at, and 111 West 57th Street, the Steinway Tower that stands 2 blocks east of it, is even more extreme. At 1,428 feet of height on a base only 57 feet wide, its slenderness ratio is 24 to 1, the thinnest skyscraper in the world. Both buildings face the same physics, and they faced it at proportions no residential tower in history had been built at before. There are 2 ways to engineer around the problem. The first is to interrupt the wind's grip on the building before it can build into resonance. You do that by punching open mechanical floors into the tower every 12 stories or so. Large louvered voids that wind can pass straight through, breaking up the alternating pressure pattern before it can lock into a destructive rhythm. The second is to let the building sway and then catch it. You do that by suspending an enormous mass near the top of the building, hundreds of tons of steel hung on cables or rolling on a track, calibrated to swing in the opposite direction of the building's motion. As the building tilts one way, the mass swings the other, dissipating the kinetic energy before it reaches the residence. That is the tuned mass damper. The Taipei 101 Tower has one. The Citigroup Center in Manhattan has one. The Steinway Tower next door to 432 Park Avenue, designed by Shopee Architects with structural engineering by WSP, has a tuned mass damper weighing approximately 800 tons. Central Park Tower further west on the same block, designed by Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill, has its own damping systems. These devices are not exotic, they are not experimental, they are the standard solution for residential super talls of this slenderness, and they have been since the late 20th century. 432 Park Avenue was designed by Raphael Vinoli with structural engineering by WSP, the same firm that engineered the Steinway Tower next door, and the design they delivered for 432 Park took the first approach. The open mechanical floors are clearly visible from the street, 5 double-height voids cut into the tower every 12 stories, designed to disrupt vortex shedding by letting wind pass straight through the building. In wind tunnel testing, the design performed to specification. The structural engineers signed off. The New York City Department of Buildings approved the permits. The city reviewed the plans and issued certificates of occupancy. Every party in the regulatory chain did what they were required to do, against the rules that existed at the time. But the second approach, the tuned mass damper, the suspended counterweight that 111 West 57th Street installed in the very same year that 432 Park was completing construction, was not included in the design of 432 Park Avenue. The building has no tuned mass damper, it has no large pendulum at the top. Its strategy for handling vortex shedding was, and is, the open mechanical floors alone. This is the single most consequential engineering distinction between the most famous failing residential tower in New York and its successful neighbor on the next block. The Steinway Tower next door, more slender than 432 Park by a wide margin, was designed to sway at its upper floors by roughly 3 feet in each direction in the strongest winds, and that movement is absorbed and damped down to comfort levels by the 800-ton mass swinging at the top. The residents of the Steinway Tower live with motion. They were told to expect it. They have not, as of public record, organized a $165 million fraud lawsuit against their developer. The residents of 4 and 32 Park Avenue have. Before we go into what those residents say their building actually does, and what the court records allege the developer knew, I want to ask you something, because this is the question every viewer answers privately and that I genuinely want in the comments. If you had paid $88 million for a penthouse in a 1,396-foot tower, and you found out after moving in that the building 2 blocks east, taller and thinner than yours, had an 800-ton damper at the top, that your building did not, would you call that a defect? Or would you call that the deal you accepted when you signed the contract? Because the answer to that question is what the entire lawsuit at 432 Park is going to turn on. Tell me where you land. I read every one. The marketing of 432 Park Avenue, when it opened in 2015, did not lead with the slenderness. It led with the views, with the height, with the pure square concrete and glass geometry that the developer Harry Macklowe described repeatedly and on the record as the building of the 21st century. The penthouse sold for $87.7 million to a Saudi retail billionaire. Total sellout reached $3.1 billion. The developers cleared a reported $900 million in profit. By every financial measure the project's principals cared about, 432 Park Avenue was a triumph. And then the residents started moving in. The first complaints arrived within 2 years of the building's opening. Residents began reporting sounds, not the minor settling clicks of any new building finding its footprint, but prolonged groaning and deep structural creaking that intensified whenever wind speeds rose. At 1,396 feet above street level, wind is not an occasional event, it is the permanent condition. On most days in Manhattan, the residents of 432 Park Avenue live at an altitude where most people only ever experience weather from inside an aircraft. According to interviews and lawsuits that followed, residents described pipes inside the walls vibrating so violently during high winds that bathtubs became effectively unusable. Doors would not close because their frames had moved out of square. There were whistles in the doorways and elevator shafts. Metal partitions groaned. And then there was the trash chute, a straight 1,300-foot vertical drop with no breaks and no offsets, which, according to internal board meeting minutes, reportedly sounded when a bag of garbage was dropped from an upper floor like a bomb going off inside the building every time someone took out the garbage. The system failures were more serious than the noise. According to the litigation that followed, between 2017 and 2019, the building experienced repeated catastrophic water events. Floods occurred between floors 83 and 86. Pipes burst on the 60th and 74th floors within 4 days of each other. 2 of the 4 residential elevator shafts flooded. Water damage, in 2018 alone, reached $9.7 million. 35 apartments were damaged by leaks. An elevator was out of service for weeks. The building's insurance premiums rose by 300% over 2 years. On Halloween night of 2019, a resident stepped into one of the elevators during a high wind event. The system slowed the car, as it was designed to do, and the resident sat trapped inside the cab somewhere above 57th Street for 1 hour and 25 minutes. In September of 2021, the condo board filed its first lawsuit, which, according to Bloomberg's reporting, sought as much as $250 million in damages, documenting more than 1,500 construction and design defects. The complaint included language characterizing the situation as one of the worst examples of sponsor malfeasance in the development of a luxury condominium in the history of New York City. The developers, CIM Group and Maclo Properties, rejected the lawsuit, called it ill-advised, described the tower as a treasure, and characterized the building as containing a sophisticated symphony of systems that needed fine-tuning as residents settled in. They denied responsibility for the structural complaints. The first lawsuit ground through the courts for years and reportedly produced more than 4 million pages of documents. In April of 2025, the condo board filed a second lawsuit, this one for $165 million, with a 46-page complaint documenting 1,893 defects in the building's facade survey and using language the first complaint had not. The phrase was deliberate and far-reaching fraud. The 2025 complaint alleges, among other things, that a facade survey conducted in 2016, while the building was still being sold, identified those 1,893 defects with more than half classified as life safety items, and that the report was concealed from buyers. It alleges that the offering plan language was changed from concrete, that will prevent water penetration, to concrete, that was designed to prevent water penetration, one word changed from will to designed to, allegedly, to limit liability, when the failures came to light. The complaint also alleges that water has infiltrated the structural columns and that the steel rebar inside the reinforced concrete is corroding. CIM Group has stated that it vehemently denies the claim and will be moving to dismiss the complaint. Maclo Properties has called the allegations exaggerated. The case is pending. None of these allegations has been ruled on. If you have made it this far in the file, you already know what kind of channel this is, and you already know that the question I keep returning to is the question of what was known and when. The answer in this case is not hidden behind any particular email. It is hidden in plain sight, 2 blocks east, on the same street, in a taller and thinner building that solved the wind problem differently. The Steinway Tower's tuned mass damper is not a secret. It is documented in Engineering Trade Press. It was installed before 432 Park Avenue's lawsuits were filed. It was specified in the design of a building on the same street by the same structural engineering firm, designed to a slenderness ratio nearly twice as extreme. The question, the genuinely hard question this file is built around, is why the comparable solution was not included in the design of 432 Park Avenue. And the honest answer, as best as the public record allows me to say it, is that nobody in the regulatory chain was required to ask. New York City's building code contains enforceable thresholds for structural safety. It does not contain enforceable thresholds for residential wind comfort. The code governs whether a building is safe to occupy. It does not govern whether the motion inside that building is compatible with someone actually living in it. 432 Park Avenue could satisfy every applicable code requirement and simultaneously be, by its residents' own account, difficult to live in during strong wind events. According to the public record, both of those things were true at the same time. This is, in my honest assessment, the most underappreciated regulatory gap in American luxury residential real estate. The developer chose the slenderness ratio. The architect engineered to it within the code. The city approved it. At no point in that process did any party have a regulatory basis to reject the design on the grounds that, while structurally safe, the building's behavior in the wind might not feel the way the marketing materials had implied. That gap was written into the code in an era when residential towers of this slenderness did not exist. Nobody updated it when developers started building them. And by the time the problems at 432 Park Avenue became public, 3 more pencil towers had already opened or were under construction on the same block. Here's the second question, and I think it is the one this file really turns on. When the regulatory code does not protect you, who does? The lawyer who reviewed your contract before you signed? The independent inspector you hired? The architect whose name was on the marketing materials? The developer whose name was on the offering plan? The certifications from the engineering firm that designed the structure? In the case of 432 Park Avenue, by the residents' own accounts in the legal filings, every one of those parties signed off on a building that the residents now say is failing them. So whose job is it exactly to ask the comfort question, the livability question, the why doesn't this tower have the thing the next tower has question, before $3.1 billion changes hands? Tell me in the comments. I do not have a clean answer. I do not think there is one. But I think the question is the most important question this file raises, and the answers people give in the comments are going to be the entire point of doing this. In the time since the first lawsuit was filed, the resale market at 432 Park Avenue has revised its own assessment of what the building is worth. Thomas Peterfy, the founder of Interactive Brokers, sold his 84th floor unit in 2024 for $13.5 million, a substantial loss on what he had paid. A unit on the 79th floor, originally listed at $135 million, was cut to $92 million and finally sold in October of 2023 for $65.6 million, less than half its original asking price. The $87.7 million penthouse purchased by a Saudi billionaire in 2016 has been listed for sale since 2021, originally at $169 million, then cut to $130 million, then cut again to $105 million, and as of the most recent reporting, even at the steeply reduced price, it has been extraordinarily difficult to sell. The wealthiest buyers in the world have looked at that apartment and at the lawsuits surrounding the building and walked away. Resale comparables across the tower have run roughly 30 to 50% below original purchase prices. In a Manhattan real estate market that was otherwise rising over the same period, 432 Park Avenue was the building moving in the wrong direction. The remediation work has been substantial. According to the developer's statements, failed pipe systems have been repaired or replaced. Elevator infrastructure damaged by water intrusion has been addressed. Window sealing has been redone. Finished defects in common areas have been corrected. The full financial figures have not been disclosed publicly, and there is a category of remediation that, by the physics of the building, simply cannot be performed. A tuned mass damper, the suspended pendulum that 111 West 57th Street installed when it was built, cannot now be retrofitted into a fully occupied residential tower at over 1,000 feet of elevation. There is no practical engineering pathway to add that mass to the top of 432 Park Avenue in any cost-effective way. The damper question, the missing pendulum question, the question of why this tower does not have the thing the next tower has, is now permanent. The building is what it was designed to be. The slenderness ratio is fixed in the concrete that was poured between 2012 and 2015. What it was designed to be turns out to be different from what it was sold as. The engineering solution that 432 Park Avenue did adopt, the open mechanical floors that disrupt vortex shedding, performed by every structural metric the way it was supposed to. The engineers were not wrong. They identified the right problem, picked a recognized solution, designed it correctly, tested it, and built it. The structural brief was met. The consequence, which the lawsuit alleges is now being lived out by the residents and the resale market, is this. Those open mechanical floors exposed every utility system, every pipe run, every electrical conduit passing through them to the exterior environment continuously, year after year, in ways the building's internal systems were not designed to sustain indefinitely. The flooding allegedly traces back to the mechanical floors. The acoustic problems allegedly originate at the mechanical floors. The system failures the residents have documented allegedly connect to those mechanical floors. The engineering solution that made 432 Park Avenue structurally tolerable made it, by the residents' account, operationally fragile. The fix was the failure, and the alternative solution, the damper, was sitting in the design of the building 2 blocks east the entire time. I personally think there are 2 versions of 432 Park Avenue, and both of them are true at the same time. In one version, this is a structurally safe, code-compliant, architecturally significant residential tower designed by a celebrated architect, engineered by a world-class firm, approved by the city, and built on time and within the regulatory framework that governed every step of the process. The structural engineers were right. The wind tunnel data was right. The building stands. In the other version, this is a $3.1 billion residential investment that lost more than 1/3 of its asking price across its highest value units within 10 years, where the most expensive penthouse ever sold cannot find a buyer at any price near its original cost, where the residents are in court alleging deliberate fraud, where the resale comparables have collapsed, where the building's insurance premiums have tripled, and where the engineering distinction between this tower and its successful neighbor on the next block, the missing 800-ton pendulum that absorbs wind energy on the same street at a more extreme slenderness ratio, is a piece of equipment that cannot now be added. Both versions are documented, both are real. The gap between them is where the file lives. I personally think the broader lesson of Billionaires Row, the part that reaches beyond one tower, is that the real estate industry has been building a class of asset for which the regulatory framework was not designed. New York City's building code was written for a market in which residential towers did not exceed certain proportions, did not move in the wind in ways the inhabitants could feel, and were not sold as global investment vehicles at price points where minor discomforts compound into legal claims. The code regulates safety. It does not regulate comfort. It does not regulate marketing. It does not regulate the gap between what a wind tunnel model says and what a resident's experience says. And by the time that gap becomes visible to the buyers, the building is poured, the developer is paid, the architect has moved on, and the structure is what it is. The 800-ton pendulum either was or was not designed into it. I asked you near the beginning whether the missing damper was a defect or just the deal you signed. Now that you have walked through the rest of the file, I want to know if your answer changed. And here is the question I really want you to wrestle with in the comments. If you had $88 million today, and you could buy the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue at a 40% discount in a building that meets every code, that is structurally safe by every official assessment, that sways in the wind without the 800-ton pendulum its taller and thinner neighbor has, that has 1,893 documented facade defects under active litigation, where the resale comparables have collapsed across the top floors, where the lawsuit is pending, and the developer denies everything, would you buy it? At what discount does the deal finally outweigh the building's reputation? Because somebody eventually has to answer that question for real every time a unit lists. Tell me your number. I read them all.